Okay, a little bit of discussion today on flood control and seepage control and how one affects the other. So if we look at the ancient Red Deer River, it was a very broad river that flowed rapidly, carving out the Drumheller Valley. And when it finally had enough of the ice on the glaciers had melted that the flows started to diminish and only happened as a result of rain, the river started to become narrow and somewhat sinuous, as we call it, through the valley. And these areas here were areas that filled when it was running at its highest flow with silts and gravels on top of the bedrock or the clays that we see. When Drumheller was settled, people liked being in the sandy silt areas because it was easy to dig a basement. They could put in a well, but they could also get rid of the waste real easy from the outhouses and privies that were dotted around the area as well. If we look at a cross-section of the river, that cross-section shows the Drumheller Valley down to the bottom, across, a little thalweg in the river, back up, and the other side of the valley. This area is the area that's filled with sands and gravels and silts, and is where many of the houses, some of the wells, have been established. And this is our river. These areas, up on top and out of the valley, or down here under the river, is the bedrock clay. So what we've done and are going to continue to do is, where necessary, we're going to build some dikes to hold the river in the river when it goes into flood. As a result, the high flow passes from the flood event and we don't see it encompass too much of the flood area, and it keeps the houses dry. In some areas of the valley, this sand on top of the clay next to the river is so porous that the water pours in here, and in some circumstances gets into the basements of the properties. In a few areas of the valley, it actually comes out of the ground once the flood has hit about 30 to 48 hours at the higher level. The higher we make these dikes, the more pressure is caused into this area, and it wants to equalize and come up, and that causes more out of the ground, but also forces it into the basement areas. Many folks have sumps in these areas that they're able to pump out and keep the seepage at bay by pumping, and they would never be able to keep up with the river if it came through this area in a flow versus a seepage situation. So how would we fix it? One of the strategies that a lot of people talk about is, in the core of the dike or beside the dike, can we make some kind of a cutoff all the way from the top of the dikes down to the bedrock and be able to stop that seepage from coming through? That is a possibility, but it is not economical, because in this picture we would have to make a core that long. It's not going to do any good just beside that house or just beside that house. We have to contain the whole area and tie it back into our clay. This area then becomes very lengthy and very expensive to build through this lens of material that can range from 2 to 20 meters in depth. Some of the areas that we have in the valley are very thick gravel bars that are susceptible to that seepage. But the biggest challenge of all is, if we build this cutoff wall, we can't train the water to go through it. So we would have a rainfall that falls in here that eventually would fill this whole area with groundwater and create what we call a perched water table in this whole area. And bingo, we've got seepage into the basements again, probably even worse than what we have in the very infrequent flooding we have. So that's where it becomes extremely expensive and counterproductive for us to put cutoffs or barriers in the silt zones to keep the river from coming in, stops the groundwater from getting out. So yet again, one of the big challenges that we have in our decision tree to work things out in the Drumheller Valley. We've done a lot of geotechnical investigation throughout the valley, and we're continuing to look at that and do more detailed analysis on this on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, so that we can figure out exactly where, if anywhere, that we can do this, and those areas that we simply cannot. Thanks.